Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone that is with us over the internet. It's always good to be here on a Sunday, to be together, learn a little bit, seeing some faces back today here present. It's always good. So today we're going to have our lecture about marriage and divorce that our friend Marco is going to be giving to us. But as always, before our start of our lecture, we're going to do our initial reading and initial prayer. So we're going to do the reading from the book Happy Life by Divaldo Pereira Franco by the Spirit of Joana de Angelis. Accept people just as they appear to you. This arrogant man that you do not like is sick and may not know it. This recalcitrant gentleman is unhappy within himself. That demanding acquaintance has nerve problems. Some who appear proud are merely suffering from conflicts that they try to hide. Others, who appear to be indifferent, are experiencing terrible fears. The earth is a great hospital of souls. The person who sees you just superficially has no way of analyzing you correctly. Let everyone be what they are and not what you want them to be. So let us all now here connect our hearts and our minds to the good spirits here present, our benefactors and mentors. And let this light come through us and shine. And let's be open for the lessons that are going to be brought today to us through our brother Marco. May he be enlightened and guided all through this lecture. And so be it. Marco, all yours.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It's very nice to be here again in person, talking to you guys about spiritism, and today we're going to talk about marriage and divorce. But before I start, I want to also acknowledge something very interesting that is happening and very important that's happening this week, and that hence my shirt, because we have actually Pope Francis here in Canada this week, and now he's back, but and he was here with the sole and only role of apologizing for the role of Catholic Church during the residential schools time and their responsibility on that. I think this is I don't think in any moment in history that had happened before. So I think it's so important for us as Canadians, as a culture, but also for everyone, Christians in the world, seeing a leader of a probably still one of the largest churches in the world, taking responsibility for actions that happened in the past. And I think that cannot be more Christian than anything else we study, right? Obviously, this is not the last step of the process, probably most likely the first step of the process. But it is so important that I think all of us, independent of what religion what culture, whatever we believe in, have to, recognize this is like a major step in the evolution, right? In regeneration world, right? We talk so much about regeneration and we don't look about concrete steps of regeneration, right? And I think this is cannot be more clear step in the process of regeneration, right? And planetary transition, we talk about this all the time, and it's always like this, almost like a hypothetical thing that these spirits are going to come and those spirits are going to do this, and we're not looking at what's happening around us, which is actually already happening. But we really want this incredible thing to happen at some point in our planet. We're going to come here and the planet is like completely different. Like, no, right? Planetary transition is happening all the time around us, everywhere, and we should actually look more carefully for it, right? So anyway, so that's why I have the Every Child Matter shirt today. Now we're going to talk about the topic of the day before I give a lecture about planetary transition, which I tend to do quite often, talk tangentially about a lot of stuff. So we're going to talk about marriage and divorce. And I'm going to bring basically a very I'll try to avoid going to the beaten path and talk about stuff that you probably seen many, many times before. So I decided to take a slightly different approach and go and use as a reference, primary reference, Evolution in Two Worlds by Andrea Louise. And that is where I think a lot of this very unique perspective on the spiritual perspective of marriage and divorce, I think, comes from in Spiritism. And also we have examples by Andrea Louise too in several books, right? And we're going to be some of them here. And also Emmanuel brings in Renunciation, for example. It's a beautiful story of love and marriage, and how true love, what true love represents in a spiritual sense. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it. And obviously following mostly Spirit's book and the Gospel According to Spiritism. Okay, so let's go through that journey. Okay, so obviously we all know in our world what marriage means as a common general concept, right? But at the same time, we also acknowledge that there's different traditions and cultures and different ways of seeing marriage, right? Depending on where you are and which culture you're coming from, you may, for example, require a religious celebration primarily, which is like the cornerstone of the. It could be like the pillar, right, of what marriage it is. In other places, all you need is the civil marriage, right, to sign the papers and legally being married. And in others, you need specific traditions and rituals that if you don't do, then it seems like the marriage is not complete, right? So there's this incredible variability, and it changes over time. Thank God it changes, right? Because, hundreds of years ago, like the institution of marriage as we know today was completely different, right? And very likely in our laws, 500 years from now, it's going to be different again, right? Because things are constantly evolving, right? Do you want an example, right? Same-sex marriage, right? Which is something that right now we recognize, but you see how many hundreds of years it took for us to understand that love, pure love, right, is not wrong, right? You can't label pure true love as something that is incorrect or wrong, or you patch, or like you create a little like a guide or mold that's like it has to be in this particular conformation, right? So see, it's changing, and it eventually will continue to change and evolve. So Allan Kardec recognizes that, and this we're talking about over 160 years ago, and he's already bringing in some of these concepts that we're just now understanding a little bit more, right? For example, one of the big concepts, right, about the union of two people married is that this permanent concept, right? This is permanent, like no one can actually break this apart, right? But if you think about it, in Spiritism, we're going to start to understand that some of the unions or reunions that we have in this incarnated world are not necessarily designed or planned to be, as we believe as this concept of marriage, like this perfect union that can never be separated, right? Of course not, right? Some of the unions that we have here are expiatory, right? So we come because we need to address certain things with that particular individual that we have to get over with. And they may or may not last for the entire incarnation, but it's something that we have to learn from and fix, right? So Allan Kardec answers that by, the spirits are going to answer Allan Kardec in question 695. They're going to say, is marriage the permanent union of two individuals, right? Is this contrary to the law of nature, right? Kardec is asking. And then the spirits say, no, it represents progress and evolution of humankind. So what he's trying to say is that eventually every union that we have in the spiritual and the physical world will resemble the true meaning of marriage in the spiritual world, which is basically like this perfect, profound, beautiful connection by love, right, between two spirits, right? And then Kardec asks another question, which I find very interesting. The next question, follow-up questions, like, what about abolishing marriage? Because, at some point people were like, why we have this all together, right? Why we have to certify this type of unions and not have like a, more random arrangement that, you do whatever you want, like a free-for-all type of approach, right? And then the spirits are going to answer in an interesting way. They're going to say this will be the return of a more like an animal perspective, or like primitive perspective of relationships, which is absolutely true, right? Now, going back to evolution now. So, from the most basic life forms to where we are now, there's also an evolution of a lot of things that happen, not only, our ability to think of what we do and learn from our mistakes and passing on culture and examples to people, but also how we relate to each other, right? And what the spirits are trying to say is that, if you don't um, base your society on this concept of families or unions, right, where an individual is co-responsible for creation and brings to that new spirit that's incarnating that environment that will allow that spirit to thrive, then you're basically going back to unions as a sole reproductive pattern, right? In other words, that's what most more primitive animals do, right? So it'll be a innate essence of animals. We are animals too, right? Of basically reproduction for creating new souls, and it's like we don't really think too much about it. That's kind of what we're designed to do, right? So we're beyond that stage. Now we're like, yes, there's reproduction, which is one side, which is basically we need to populate the world, right? But there's a second concept, which is much more important. It's like, how are we going to do it and why we're going to do it, right? And what's the purpose of this evolutionary step, right? And animals don't necessarily think too much about that, right? And we should. That's what the spirits are telling us. And and as the spirits are going to say something also very interesting. They say, this relationship is basically like a law of nature, right? So we're kind of designed to keep our civilization ongoing because we need to allow other spirits to incarnate, right? Remember, like in the planet Earth alone, there's probably like 3 times more spirits than incarnated individuals at the same time. So that dynamic has to continue, because if we stop the process of reproduction, it's almost like we're preventing other spirits from going through their own incarnatory planning, right? So it is almost like you're actually helping others, right, by allowing that to continue and also populate and develop, networks and relationships in our planet that are needed for us to evolve as a planet and as individuals, right? So it is a part of the law of nature, and it's obviously very, very important, right? Now, one thing that the gospel according to Spiritism brings, and I think it's very important to bring to all of us to think about, is, as we discussed in the beginning, the idea of civil law and marriage, right? So Allan Kardec is going to say this, which I think is perfect, that what is legal in one country is accepted, right, may be completely different in another country, right? And if you think about unions, right, so God has willed for individuals, and I'm just reading from the gospel now, to be united not only through the ties of flesh, right, so our bodies basically, right, but also through those of the soul, right, which is we as a spirit, so that the mutual affection of the spouses is extended to their children, and that there should be 2 instead of 1 to love and care for them, right? That's a reasonable concept, right? If you think about it, it's critical that we are basically these 2 different things at the same time, right? So we have, one is more the animal, the part of the body that's a reproductive part, and then the soul, which is what Kardec is bringing here, which is Spiritism brings to us, which is it's more like giving the opportunities to love and share that love and allow these spirits to come and to evolve with us together, right? And what about divorce? So Allan Kardec brings the idea of divorce too, which is divorce, and that's what he says, a divorce is a human law with the purpose of legally separating what is already separated, right? So this is interesting, right? Because it kind of breaks from a bunch of other different traditions, right? That what is brought together, like no one can break apart, kind of thing. It's like what God brings together, no one can separate. Which now we know that may not necessarily represent reality, right? Because in many cases, it is actually a safe thing to do to have that, right? Because of abuse, because of errors or mistakes that are happening in the relationship, right? And because sometimes those relationships are not designed to be forever, as we discussed in the beginning, right? Sometimes it's part of expiation and trials, and something that we have to deal with, or something that we have to compensate for we've done before. So in a way, divorce is actually a law that kind of enables us to do what is already done, right? So it's already separated by the time we reach to that point, right? And I think it's actually it's very new, right? For this to be brought in 160 years ago, which this would be kind of, pretty much you would probably be burned or something like that, if you say something so outrageous, right, for the society at that time, right? Now, what I really want to bring in is now this is like the basic concepts, right? What's in the gospel according to Spiritism. Now, let's move on to something a little bit more specific to Spiritism, which coming from Evolution Two Worlds, right? So in Evolution Two Worlds, there's a chapter that's going to talk about marriages from a spiritual perspective, and one of the things, the first thing that Andrea Louise is going to bring to us is the concept of emotional discipline. Now, this is an interesting concept, and I think it is the basis of what marriage really means, right? And when we're talking about marriage here, it's very clear that in not even a single line in this entire text, for example, by Andrea Louise, marriage is defined in a particular way. It's actually defined by love. Like in every single description of marriage, the description is love. It's actually not sex or gender, right? I just want to be very clear. So in emotional discipline, Andrea Louise says something that I think should be like the core essence of what we believe as a spiritist, which is marriage on a higher plane. So imagine like there's an evolution of marriage too, right? Just like there's an evolution of who we are, right? Involves souls joined by pure love, a true sanctifying union that generates admirable works of progress and beauty for society edification. So now we really have to rethink everything we just talked about, because what we're saying is that, what marriage is that it's a partnership. It's like a relationship where we're helping each other be better and help others be better. He's talking about the entire society edification, right? So now the concept extrapolates about 100-fold what we just talked about as marriage, as being together to just raise a family and reproduction, right? We're now talking about this much more complex concept where it's when we have this affinity where we now work together as a team, as a partnership, right? And this sanctifying union, in other words, is something that obviously has to be based on elevated thoughts and ideas, right, of love, will generate admirable works. In other words, we're working out together to build something that us separate could not do, right, at the same level, right? So we're joining forces, right? Now, if you think about, relationships in general, you start to think, well, but, so I actually not need to get married to do this. That's true. Because the marriage we're thinking about right now is the civil type marriage, right? Like I have to go there and sign a paper. And that's for legal purposes in our current existence. That's great. We need to do that, right? Because we need to pay the bills, share the bills, do this, apply for that, get credit, get a mortgage, if we have kids, we have to have a will. The will has to have our names. Like all of that is kind of bound by those legal contracts that we sign. So we need that, right? So, but what he's saying here, in other words, is something that goes way beyond that. It's like, the relationship really is such a one that we're going to progress and creates society's edification, right? So there are many different ways of doing that, right? That's what Andrea Louise is bringing to us, that concept, right? That we now starting to understand, right? But maybe we didn't, like years ago. Remember, this is from the 1950s, right? Where we have marches of family on the street in Brazil, just like we're having right now, defending the family as an institution, which is a very bigoted vision of what a family is, right? It's coming from a particular group that cannot see what family really is anyways. But So I'm going to do now we're going to go to some examples here of what that emotional discipline means, right? Um, so in this book, Missionaries of the Light, and I think it's an extraordinary story, as all of them by Andrea Louise, but this one talks about something that I find particularly relevant to this topic today. And we know there's the story of Sigismundo that is incarnated in that book, and we explored that many times before, and Spirit has many talks. You guys probably you can read the book, or if you can't read the book, at least you can get a YouTube something about it. There's probably like 500 of them, lectures talking about Sigismundo. So I'm not going to go into the technicalities of how someone is incarnated, right? I'm going to bypass all of that, and I'm going to go to Alexandri, Alexander in English, I guess, if you want to translate, is the mentor of that entire family, right? Entire process. And while they were observing, Adelino, which is, the father to be of Sigismundo, and, wife and family, they're actually in the house, right? Prepping up for the entire process to happen. He's actually giving lectures constantly to Andrea Louise, right? It's like, this is what happened. And then he goes like this 5 pages talking about that process, right? And I find that part is kind of ignored by a bunch of people because it's very dense, like it's very complex. And actually, Alexander says that. He said, I understand. So there's one passage I love. He says, I understand that this might be too much, basically, something like that. He said, for this moment. But here's the thing, and it continues on, right? So if you're reading that book in any way, in any format, I would say highlight the part that Alexander is actually talking. And just if you want to focus on that, you're probably going to get a lot more from that book. And you're probably going to read it again, because I've read it many times. But so he says something. The first one, the thing that I highlighted here, some passages that I want to talk to you about. So the first one he says is like, so sexual union, so sexual relationships, right, between men and women in this case, on Earth is still very close to the way expressed by rational animals, right? So he's going back to what Allan Kardec said minutes ago, right? We were talking about what the basic concepts of reproduction and family and all that. So he says something that I find quite critical. He says usually those sexual encounters are based on thoughtlessness, right? Which is an interesting word on the translation, because we're really not thinking about what we're doing, really. And we tend to do this all the time, like with a lot of things, right? And those split-second decisions about how we use our gifts, right? Or how we take care of things, or how we react when we got this bad email from work or something like that, right? So those are moments of thoughtlessness, right? Those are the moments that Andrea Louise Alexandre is referring here, because Andrea Louise is actually the student right now, right? Which is funny. So we're listening from the student, right? We're just learning from Alexandre. So, and what does it mean? It's very clear, right? We still tend to explore sexuality in a way that is very crude and primitive, right? Like the pleasure, like the idea of, we gotta do this. It's so incredible. It's like, this moment where all your hormones go up and down, your heart rate go down. It's like we explore it in a physical way, in a physical sense, right? That's what he's referring to, right? And much less on the idea that in that moment, we're having a deep connection, perispirit to perispirit, of the entire concept of the energy that we generate at that time, which is a creative energy that is generated by our perispirit, right? Which in that particular moment is at its maximum, right? And that's why that's the moment of where you have the very first step of the incarnation process of Sigismundo in that case, right? And how can we think about that while doing the act, which is kind of interesting. That's what he's talking about, right? Thoughtlessness, which is basically we're consumed by the excitement and that energy of the sexual encounter physically. And the more we do that, the less we think about what we're doing. So that's the thoughtlessness, right? And and he continues in next paragraph, he says something that I find, again, cannot be more representative of all of this. He says, love is the lower plane, love in the lower planes, like where we are actually, is like gold lost in a large quantity of ore, right? So it's such a powerful energy, right? But we completely disregard it, and it kind of gets lost in this convoluted mass of stuff that still binds us to our more animalistic beginnings, right? Now, the concept that Alexander brings in this text, which I think is the essence of relationships altogether. And again, I highlight, you guys should read this. And he's going to talk about union of qualities instead of the sexual unions. Like, what does that mean? So in the book, he's obviously talking about the deviated ways of exploring sexuality in this planet, and the relationships that we develop that are primarily guided by sexual attraction instead of soul to soul connections and love connections, right? And it's funny because we use the word love nowadays interchangeably between those two things, which is like completely different, right? But anyway, it's a different story. So union of qualities goes back to what we just thought about in the very beginning, which is, why do people get together, right? To join forces to build something better for us and for everyone, for the society, right? So that's why the union of qualities, that union of quality bound by love, right? Which should be the goal of every single union in the planes of existence, right? Instead of the idea of the primarily sexual union. That's what Alexander is talking about that time, right? So as Alexander says, this union of qualities occur in every level of creation. These are examples, and I found it beautiful. Like, for example, when we talk about chemistry, right? That compound X and compound Y, they typically react quite intensely between them, right? And they generate a new compound, right? That's basic chemistry. But what he's saying is that this is a union of qualities. Like, it's a base and an acid generates a salt, right? So the quality of one and the quality of the other get together and build something that is useful for another downstream application, right? In a level of planets, that happens too. Galaxies merge, right? And by that merging of galaxies, you generate new planets and forms of existence that were not able to be done before, right? So what Alexander is bringing is such an incredible concept. It was basically, if you think about God as this, creator of all things and all powerful and one, and we have all the concepts that we understand God and Spiritism, the perfection of creation is shown by the stability of its rules, right? So, for example, that's why we know that, the law of gravity, for example, which people say that, law of gravity explains the entire creation of the universe. Great, right? So that's perfect, because that is exactly how the universe was created. So it actually signs the fingerprint of who created it in there, and it's stable, and it explains a lot of the process that we live in. Perfect. Now, this union of qualities is also some sort into that realm, which is like a law that bounds and interacts with every single level of existence in the planet, including us, including we. Like, that's how we got together and unite, right? To generate this new, novel existences, like something better, right, for the universe, which is really deep. And that's where Alexander stopped and said, maybe this is a little bit too much for you guys now. So what I'm trying to say is that this is actually just a tiny little bit of the iceberg, right? And we're not there yet. Let's put it this way, right? We're still learning from it, right? So Andreas then continues on in the same in Evolution to Worlds, right? He's gonna say something also very, very interesting. Now he's gonna give ideas of what happens when we unite or we separate in the physical world versus the spiritual world, right? So first, he's going to talk about multiple marriages or expiatory marriages, right? And I'm just read exactly from the book. So it is common to experience marriage many times, right, without finding the company of the kindred soul to whom they would accomplish the ideal union, which is the union of qualities we just talked about, right? This is because according to the principle of cause and effect, it is usually necessary to redeem this or that debt connected with using the wrongly used sexual energy or something that happened before between those two individuals. So that is not because it's needed because we've decided to do it in the past and we've done it. Now we have to deal with the consequence, right? That's cause and effect. It's not that God decided that we had to do this, we got to do that, right? We ourselves did whatever we've done. And then to redeem those things, we need to reunite at another chance. We're gonna go to school, we're gonna learn all of this in the spiritual world. We come back with beautiful plans, like we gotta do this, and then we go there, and then we don't, right? And then we come back again, like we're gonna redeem it. Like we give another chance, okay, let's do this, and then we go. So we go through the cycles of trials, right? Of until we finally, can get rid of that debt that's still kind of hanging around us, right? Interesting too, he brings that in case that the spouse discarnates, right? The partner discarnates, right? And Dreblowitz gives this interesting perspective of, the idea that they're usually going to be out there in the spiritual world helping out, because that's what true love is, right? True love is not ownership, right? True love means you want the best of that person no matter what, right? You want to help out, and you want the pure development of that spirit. And then they actually going to come and help if there's a new relationship, if there's a new wedding, new marriage, like and obviously there are specific moments where the spirit that discarnate is not developed enough, evolved enough to the point of looking back at a new marriage of the old partner and say, wow, you're going to help them, right? Because that's a union that's going to help someone, right? It's like building up, right? Sometimes they're going to look back and say, oh, why are you doing it with my husband, and they come, and some obsessions can develop because of that. But those are rare. That's what Andrea is saying. Like most often that does not happen, which is interesting. So the widow or widower, right, when discarnate may live. So now when the widow or widower discarnate and goes to the spiritual world, and this is, I find amazing. So they may actually reunite the entire family, like the previous wife and the previous husband and partner, right, spouse, and they all reunite together and they kind of live as a family, because that relationship of who's the kid, who's the dad, who's the widow, who's the new wed, it doesn't exist in the spiritual world. That does not exist. We may have lived in alternating roles hundreds and hundreds of times before, right? So in a way, we're all of those spirits are actually from the same spiritual family, which is a concept that, sometimes we don't think too much about, but it would explain a lot, right? So nothing really happens by chance, right? That's what Andrea Luiz is saying. This is all part of a very large family or group of spirit that share that same quality of, of same ideas, right? Or same vibration, if you want to use more, more technical way, if you want to think that way, okay? So now he continues on, and he talks about the idea that there's always this concept of some benefactors in the spiritual world that we might have, right? And sometimes those benefactors, a spirit that's helping us out without actually really showing itself. It's like coming from above, kind of down. Sometimes it may be the partners, right? That discarnated or not incarnated, right? Which is also very interesting too. Now, how does that play out in an example? So I'm going to bring an example now from the book Renuncia or Renunciation, right? By Emmanuel. And this is a book, again, one of the novel kind of romances, right, from Emmanuel, but has a deep understanding or analysis of relationships, right? And again, I would highly recommend you guys having a chance to maybe it's a big book, but it's a very nice book. So this book tells a story of two main characters, Alcyone and Pollux. So both of these spirits also have been part of previous books on that series, like 50 years later, right? They're all there with Emmanuel, so Emmanuel's part of it, right? And these main characters, basically, they've been separated They were um, they were partners before, right? But they've been separated now, primarily because Pollux, when he was about, this is the first part of the book explains that. So when he was about to break through or break free from all the debts that he encountered over the many levels, many um, experiences he had on Earth, he ended up falling kind of on the same mistakes again, and those mistakes kind of evolved into some very, very large debts that he acquired in the last experience he has, and that prevented him from seeing or interacting with Alcyone, which kind of continued to pick up on her evolution. Now she's like in another constellation, she's in Sirius now, like working in a super high level spiritual existences that I don't even know what they do there because it's so far away from my grasp, right, of understanding that. But I'm sure, and I can certainly be sure of that because Emmanuel is telling me that even Emmanuel himself cannot really explain exactly what they're doing there, but it's certainly some very high level decisions and actions in the benevolent way to help the universe, right? So she's really high there. And Pollux is kind of where we are, right? Which is not that high in the spiritual evolution in any level, in any concept, right? So they were not able to be together. And this is very common in spiritual world because if we're not vibrating in the same, if we're not, remember the union of qualities, so that's exactly what we're talking about, right? So when the reaction cannot happen, right? So this is like magnets that are not aligned properly. They actually repulsive to each other, right? So it's kind of the same concept. So the vibrations are so desperate and together and different that there's actually a physical barrier almost, right, for these two spirits to even seeing each other. So very, very good chances that Pollux cannot see or interact or even view like Alcyone, right, because of that barrier. But obviously Alcyone, as benevolent and as evolved as she is, right, and I'm using she just because she's a female incarnated in, but again, they have no sex, right? So, today is the day that we're going to talk about pronouns and sex all the time, right? So, in the spiritual perspective, there's no definition of sex for a spirit, right? They can come as woman or man or whatever. So she's out there helping from a distance, right? And Pollux actually discarnates. He goes into this massive training of, okay, we're gonna do this, and I'm gonna go in, and I'm gonna go to church, and I'm gonna be a priest. And by being a priest, I'm gonna, I'm not gonna tell all the story, but basically they're gonna compensate. The plan was to kind of go through all the debts he acquired. He's gonna build up that institution. He's gonna help people through that role, and there you go. He was gonna fix all of it. It's gonna be perfect, right? So Alcyone is all there. He doesn't know. She's all there, kind of, organizing it. And seeing that chance of Pollux to come in and do something good, she's like, I'm gonna go and help him out, right? And then the conversation between Alcyone and her mentor at that time is very interesting because the mentor's like, are you sure about this, right? You don't need this, right? You're like beyond all of us, right? You can be here and help from here. You can be here and help like the entire planet if you want to, right? Why do you want to go? And the mentor's like, if you go, you're going to suffer the consequences of not you, but what the planet does to people like you. Example, Jesus, right? That's a great example, right? He's going to be stoned or crucified. Like there's always something negative that's going to happen because we're not ready for that kind of, collectively, right? It's fine. So Alcyone said, you know what? That's okay. I'll take it. I'll go down from here all the way to incarnate on Earth again to help him out and also help the entire group that was incarnating together, right? So that's a great example of what true love means, right? They're not even together, right? They can't be together. So these are individuals that are completely different in different spectrum of thoughts and evolution, right? So do you see couples like that? I do, right? So families, that have this completely contradictory, contrasting characteristics within the family all the time, right? So this is what Emmanuel is really trying to teach us, is that, see, do you want to see what exactly true love means? It's like there's no boundaries or relationships or, no, it's like the love exists anywhere, anytime, and we're always working to do the best for the other and for everybody else, right? Now, if you go up in levels of evolution, that goes, instead of being like one person, being the entire planet, right? That same love. Or being the entire creation, right? Like Jesus, for example. He's in that level. So that love that Jesus is sharing with us, it's such a magnitude of pure love that we can't even grasp, right? We're, and when the spirits are asked about, it's like, can you explain what that means? Like, think about maternal love. And this is like a little trick of it, right? That's what, from your perspective, that's what mostly closely represented, but still far away, right? So she decides to come back. And she's going to incarnate basically as a supporting role, basically to, see what's going on and help out. So she comes in. So he comes in and incarnates as Carlos, Father Carlos, Priest Carlos, right? And he goes according to plan, goes to church, and he went in there, and he meets Alcione during that process, right? And Alcione tries everything possible to keep him on track for his plan. He decides to change, of course, and then he said, I want to be with you, Alcione. So he quits everything on the church, decides to be with Alcione. But Alcione could not do it at the time. She was actually dealing with a lot of other things she had on her incarnatory plan, her family, and that was not really the design of the process anyways, right? So she says, I can't do this now. I'm going to go take care of my family, and they are separated one more time, right? So he goes into another marriage, which is full of like everything negative you can possibly imagine, right? So there's adultery, there's aggressiveness, there's negative things happening all the time. It's really, really like a chaotic, catastrophic marriage for Carlos, right? And then now, which is interesting, because Carlos now say, I call it quits. I can't. So he divorces, right, his wife. But instead of taking all of that and say, okay, I'm going to have one more chance, I'm going to do this right again. No. So he actually joins another the Jesuits, right, which are actually part of the Inquisition at that time, right? So he's going to be an inquisitor, right? So see how the deviation of the role started, right? And then one step after the other, like every decision now, it's kind of pulling him down and down and down, and obviously Alcione, now seeing that she's not able to reconnect to that, she's like, okay, I'm gonna serve as the Carmelitas, right? So she goes into another church institution to help out people, right? But Alcione, being Alcione, so she sees people doing negative things, and whatever, like this bad guys who are doing a lot of weird stuff. We can read about. I'm not gonna tell you all the story, but she sees all of that happening, and she can't be quiet and accept that. She's like, she reports, she's like, this is not okay. What happens to her? She's imprisoned, of course, right? She's just trying to defend, what's correct, what's good. She ended up imprisoned, and now we have an inquisitor and someone who's Alcione, who is another name too, Maria. She's now accused of being a witch. So I'll just stop there, and you can imagine what's going to happen when they re-encounter at the end of the book, right? So he is the inquisitor who actually ordered her prison, right? When he sees her, recognizes her, when she's there, right? So, anyways, it is a touching story. I think the last few pages of that encounter between them as spirits in those roles, and she being this incredibly elevated spirit that can just help him out, actually feeling the consequences of his own actions, and him recognizing there how bad of a thing he's done in the last. It's just, you know. And it's interesting because I when I read this, I'm not thinking about, oh, that's a bad story. No, I think about me. I'm like, gee, what am I doing, right? Because I'm 100% sure I've done that or worse, right? Probably be worse. Yes. Uh, but, we don't see it, right? And I think this book is actually an example because it talks about relationships of true love and how, and how those relationships can kind of, make the side turns depending on, how we make the decisions or how we act or how we respond to certain trials or certain challenges that are posed in front of us, right? And and I think forces us to understand this again, this primary concept that Andrea Luiz and Emmanuel now is bringing to us is that, what really these connections are, they're really a connection of real through love, right? That is based on the concept that we're uniting qualities to flourish as a spiritual being, right? Better than we could do, like maybe separately, right? Or like in the big family, spiritual family, which most likely that's what it is, and helping others and making society evolve together, right? That's our role, right? And I think this book shows really well what real love is. Because, I'll tell you what's going to happen after the story ends. They're probably happy now, living in a very evolved spiritual world. They are. He probably fixed all his mistakes already, and he's far light years ahead of us, and we're still here judging him like, oh, how can you do this? God, you just killed us. You just did this to her, and we're stuck into that concept of judging him. And the same fact that he's probably by now, like looking at us and trying, oh, bless this poor soul, Maybe they learn from what I've done because I'm already passed by it, like a lot, right? Anyway, so this is really the concept. And the last thing I want to bring is from the same idea from the Evolution in Two Worlds. So what Andrea Luiz now brings about the divorce part, right? So he says, as for divorce, according to what we know on the spiritual plane, now he's talking about the spiritual plane, our opinion is that it should not be encouraged or facilitated. I'll stop there, right? Because, every single connection between individuals has somewhat of a purpose behind that we cannot grasp, right? So, of course, yes, you got to do it when you need to do it, right? That's not what he's saying. But he's also saying that it's not a thing that, oh, things are tough. Let's call it quits, I think there's a balance there that I think it's so important for spiritists to bring this because it's so clear for us, right? But now there's like a religious concept on top of it. There's like more not only philosophical, legal purpose, but now there's a more religious component to it. It's like, why? Because every marriage on earth, Andrea is saying, legalized or not, right? And we talked about differences before that do not have serious implications concerning response. So correct that. So every marriage on earth, legalized or not, they have serious implications concerning the responsibility assumed by the couple. In other words, there is some sort of a plan behind all of this, right? Don't assume that, oh, this is completely not this should never have happened. I don't know why this happened, and this is tough and that's it. No, there's a history behind there that we don't know, right? And we got to make the best out of any scenario. Oh, does that mean I have to be together all my life? No, it doesn't mean that. But it means that you have to take every situation in the best positive way possible for everybody around, right? That's what the idea of a union is, right? So he continues, it is crucial for humane sentiment to intervene in special cases, right? As he's saying, when divorce is the least of the evils, right? For everyone else involved, knowing that the debtors will return tomorrow to set their debts, right? So in other words, every decision we make, it doesn't matter if it's wedding or if it's a marriage or a divorce or, work related, life related, family related, for every decision we make, there's a consequence. That's what he's trying to say, right? And as long as we're making those decisions enlightened by the idea, the concept that we're doing this for the good, for evolution, for helping, right, for being positive, and that's great. But if we're doing that for other, more, dark reasons that we're kind of keeping in the back of our minds and we don't know, then there's going to be some sort of a consequence too, right? And the consequence may not be great, right? So in other words, what he's saying is that use common sense with the spiritism, or Jesus teachings in your mind, right? If you put it that way, just to summarize it, right? If you want to make decisions based on love, right? And love superseding the idea of loving like the physical connection, right? Love being the true love, that love that you always care, you always want the best, and you always do the best for anyone. Okay, so yeah, so that's what I had to say about marriage and divorce, and yeah, I have to take questions if you have. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Marco. Thank you for the lecture. Actually, it's a good, a different approach to it.
Yeah.
And it almost encouraged me to read the book Evolution in Two Worlds, because it's
Yeah.
a book that I started and I ended because the first chapter was so above me. It was like, I'm not gonna read it.
Yeah.
So maybe I should go back and try to read the book.
It's interesting because you're right. I mean, it's I think if you're used to like a storytelling novel concepts that which is in most of all the books, right?
Yeah.
It is strikingly different because it doesn't do any of that, right? It goes straight into like technical concepts and explaining very, very complicated concepts that I would say most of them we're not even completely ready to get. I mean, it's just something that we're probably going to read. I don't know how many times I've read it. I'll probably read it 3 or 4 times, but I'll probably read it again in a couple of years from now, and I'll say, wow, I actually never thought about this, right? This entire thing about marriage, and I don't even remember reading it in the book. So you see how bad it was, right? So I probably read it. I'm like, I don't know what this is about, and I'm reading it again, like, oh my God, yeah. Never thought about this, So I agree.
No, I stopped from the first chapter. It's all it says that technical starts with physics right there, and the mirrors and like no, I think the book's gonna be all of this, and I stopped it. It's the only book from there, Luis, that I haven't read. So I'm starting to think maybe I should just pass the first chapter and keep going and try to read at least once.
Yeah, okay.
And Renunciation, definitely, it's a fantastic book as well. The end is really.
It's touching.
It's
It's one of those that you have to hold yourself in the end.
It's the first time I was mad at the man. It's like, you cannot stop the story there. I want to know what happened afterwards with Carlos.
Exactly. What happens after? Yeah, exactly.
What happened after? But it's a good concept that you bring to think, they're fine now, because that's probably a learning experience that helped the spirits to grow.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions or comments on the internet? No? Any comments or questions? Yes. Hey,
yes.
I'm very happy that I'm here today and have this lecture with this topic.
Nice.
Last week, we did 33 years of marriage.
It's amazing.
That's
Congratulations.
And I always have a lot of questions in my mind.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you have a relationship for so many years, how I still here sometimes,
Exactly.
and how I end up with him or him with me. Because we had so many in the way, right? So many things. We met in Florida. I went back to Brazil, and then that time I received a letter. It wasn't a computer, right? Anyway, and I ended up married. And I'm here. So let's say it was maybe because he's from another continent, I am another continent, and we met in another continent. Right?
Yeah.
So I always go, how, why? And I had other opportunities that they said. I remember the time that we met, and he came back to Canada, I was in Florida, and one day I called him. And he was I'm going out for soccer. I don't have time to talk to you like that. I said, this guy is out of my
My list.
Yeah.
Anyway, and after 2 years, we re-encounter again.
Yeah.
You know, and now he explaining on this.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a great example.
For me to work in my so many things. We're still going to get maybe another life together.
Yeah.
so many things. I question, you know.
Yeah. I think your example is exactly, you know, the concept, right? Because the idea is that this reincarnatory planning that occurs in the background, that we're part of it, but we don't remember, right? But it's happening, and we're involved in it, and things may not happen in a logical way for us when we're incarnated, but you know, in the spiritual perspective, everything happens with a lot of logic and sense and reason, right? Nothing happens like randomly, right? Even this random encounters, like, oh, I encountered this person. It's like nothing's random, right? So that is, there's a purpose for those things, right? And I think this is your example. It's like, you know, when you all agreed and you designed to come and do this particular relationship, and you're going to build this and you're going to develop that. So you may have different ways of reaching out to that conclusion, right? It may be that you're born as a neighbors, like me and Joyce, my wife. We're actually neighbors, right? So we went to the same school. We're like, okay, it's probably like, if we're not that close together, we're going to say, no, I don't know. It's like, I don't know. So they forced us like literally close. Like, so we'd see each other every single day. So there's no chance for that not to happen, right? In other scenarios, if you can have someone from entire different continents that just meet once, they're like, oh my God, that's it, done, right? So, you know, the way it happens is, you know, it's, yeah, but it happens, right? You're right. Yeah.
And sometimes there's even a reason why not put it close together, right? Put one in this country, got different cultures and everything, because sometimes this bounding of cultures, it's what's going to bring a richness to the relationship and everything that's needed, because each relationship or each program is different, and sometimes that's needed, right?
The richness and also more work.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It is.
That's the idea.
Yeah. But that's the idea, because then we have to work our resilience, our patience.
Exactly,
We have to learn to accept each other. The lecture that we did today with the Happy Life, right? To accept each other in different, and each culture has something that is good. They're kind of like, oh, you know what? It's better than in my culture. But the other things that, you know, and we exchange that, and each one brings a good part of your own culture and put together. But no, it's not easy. Yeah, I have been there, so I know it's not easy, the mixture of cultures, right? I think Ikata can talk about different cultures as well.
Whole subject next week.
Exactly.
So part 2 next week.
Continuation.
Yeah. But it's when it has to be the plan in some ways, How many people have here stories like you that they met on vacation, they left their country, met on a third country on vacation, and that's it, right? The only problem is like, we go here or we go here. Who's moving?
Exactly.
Right? So, but it's always happens. Any other comments or questions? No? All right. Thank you, Mark, for the lecture. At this moment, I would like to say thank you to all of you with us over the internet. We're hoping to see you back here next Sunday. So goodbye.